Okay, as promised, here is the little presentation on dates and times in Java and managing them. First, let's have a look at the kind of output that this program can create for us. This down in the console is what we expect to see. Well, that doesn't help much. There you go. We can get out the current date and time. Yes, I'm doing this late at night. We can format it in a particular way. We can set a couple of dates and compare them, which is something you'll need to be able to do, and see if one is later than the other. All right, let's look at how that was done. To begin with, we've got this import section here. Import Java text and import Java util, and that makes available to us all of the classes in the Java class library that fall into those particular packages. So just make sure you've got those imports in at the top. Moving right along, again, it's fairly standard sort of stuff. We start our class, I've called mine date example, and we start and instantiate our main method, both opening with the curly brackets. Again, nothing new there. But now, let's create a date object. There is, in those class libraries, a class called date. I want to make an object, there we go, I'll bring that up for you, that will allow me to use that in my program. So I'm going to create one that's also called date, but since mine's an object, it'll have a little d, and since I'm using the date class out of the class library, it has a capital D. So I'm creating type date, a new variable called date, or an object called date, that looks and feels and behaves and has all the attributes and behaviors of the date class in the class library. So from here on in, I'll be using that word there, date, and I'll follow that with .method, things that are available to me in the date class. And we can find out about the date class by hovering over it. So that's something I encourage you to do with Eclipse. Moving along. Let's get the current date and time. And there are a couple of ways to go about this. So what I want to do, and because I was on date before, that's highlighted, so I can get out of there. What I'm going to do is show you the perhaps easiest way to do it, and that is to simply say, hey, print to the standard output this set of letters, today's date is, and then tack onto the end of that, using our date object, the toString method that's in that class. So the guy who wrote the date class has created a set of code, a method in there called toString. And what that will do is spit out, as you can see on the list there, the date, the month, the year, the day, the hour, all manner of goodies. And that's what we're seeing right here. So this little bit of result is simply from doing that with the coding that we've done so far. So that's not too hard, but maybe it gives us a little bit more info than we really need. We only perhaps want this section. And we might not want it in that format if we're in America or somewhere else. So let's scroll and look at another way of getting the current date and time. But that, the simplest one, is probably simply to use the toString method. Here's our second way to do it, and we're using the simple date format class. So again, the simple date format, I'm creating a new object called date format that looks and behaves and feels just like that class, and I'm using this particular format, day, month, year, space, hour, minute, seconds. Now, if I hover over simple date format, you can see a little bit of detail about how that actually works. Now that we've done that, we can simply say today's date is, and then we use our object and format our date, which we created the object for before, which is the current date and time. So that's the second way we can go about it. You can see this might give us a little bit more control over the way things look and feel than the other one, but let's keep moving on. So at this point, we have got our current date and time from the system type. So let's convert a string to a date. Again, we're using simple date format. We're creating a new object called date format2, which is a date format that looks like this: the day, the month, the year, the hour, the minutes, the seconds. Now I'm creating a variable called strdate2 that looks like this. So have a good look at what's going on here. I've created a new object called dateFormat2 that's based on this class out of the Java class library of this format. And then I've created a variable called strdate2, string date2 of type string, and it holds that data. This line here is quite similar to saying int b equals 5. You know, int being the first bit, b being the variable name, equals what you're going to initialize it to. Well, that's what's going on here. String type, variable name, what we're initially making it hold. Now, let's have a look at our little bit of code. Now, in all of these bits of code to make it work, I've got exception handling, which Mr. De Lorenzo did with you. So, here we're saying date, new date equals date format 2, and because that's our object, and it looks and feels and behaves like that class, I can use any of the methods in that class to do stuff, and that's what I'm doing. Give my object name dot pass slash string date2. Now what pass really means is go through a bunch of stuff and work out something with it. So what we're telling it to do is go through string date2, in other words, go through all this stuff, pass it, and then do this stuff on it. So go through that and apply this, and that will spit out our new date. Again, there's a try-catch situation simply in case there's an error. It catches our errors, which it did with Mr. De Lorenzo. So that converts our string to a date. That is how we can get a date in the first place, or convert something that's already been done and convert it to a date so that we can do some checking on it. Now, the final part of this presentation is going to be how we can compare dates, because in the task you're doing, you cannot put a future date in. We can alter dates, but we can't make it a future date. So let's have a look at how we do date comparisons. Again, we've got a couple of ways of doing this, and what I'll show you right now is the first way to do it. Again, we're creating a new object. Our object is going to be called dateFormat3, which I use in these spots. We're using the simple date format class again, creating our own object called dateFormat3, which is a new object based on the look and feel of simple date format with a day, month and year only. And this might look a little bit more useful to you, since you are going to have to be comparing dates. If you can extract just those bits from when people are using your program, it'll work well for your task. Here's our try-catch. The catch is down lower. First of all, we have got to check this date with dateFormat3, and we'll assign the value of the date that it comes up with from that, because that's just text at the moment. It's got to be turned into a date so we can do calculations with it and check and compare them. So we pass the data that's in between the quotes and we turn it into a date, and we assign that to a variable date1 of data type date. Date2 is this other date. So now the fun comes where we get to compare them. We first let the user know what these values are. So date1 is that date, and date2 is whatever that's come out at, and it'll format it this way. Now we do our check. If date1 is after date2, let the user know. Else, if it's before, let them know. Else, if it's equal, let them know. In each case, we created, in date1, there's a system where we can check whether it's before or equals, or after, with our methods that are built in. So, finally, there's a second way to do it, and this is using the Compareto function, Compareto method. So again, date1 equals, and we'll call this one dateFormat3, pass this text and assign it to date1. Again, this text, assign that to date2. System out. Date1 is, tell them what it is. Date2 is, tell them what it is. Now comes our little if-else to do our comparison. If date1 compared to date2 is bigger than 0, we tell them it's later. If date1 compared to date2 is less than 0, we tell them it's earlier. And if it's exactly equal to 0, we tell them it's the same. So Compareto is another little method you can use. Finally, we end our catch block. So that's our two ways to do it. And you can see all of that has happened down here. That was a quick run again. Don't forget to import both of those class libraries. Set up just as normal, class name and main method. We do have to create a date object to get on with it. In my case, I just called it date. So that's a standard object creation from a class kind of a statement. We then have a couple of ways of getting our current date and time. The first way uses toString. Basically says to date is date toString. And that gives us this big section here. The easiest way, but probably not quite formatted the way we want. The second way is to use simple date format method, and that will convert a date into a string. So again, we create a brand new object based on this class with this format, and then print that out. And it'll print it out in that format. So there's our object name, dot format the date, and it's formatting it that way. We can also convert a pre-recorded string to a date, and that's what you're going to need if you're reading in from a file and you then want to do some comparisons. Again, here's our object. We've called it date format 2. It's based on the class simple date format, and we're using this format. I then set a variable, and now it's time for us to go through the contents of that variable and assign it to the new date variable, which is what's going on here. That is very much like that. Here you're saying create, I'm having a string variable with that name. Here we're saying I'm having a date variable, and you can see it's in Java util date, with that name. So this name will take on the value that it passes from here with date format 2. Finally, in the comparisons, there are two ways to do it. You can use the before, the after, and the equals methods, which you can see in action in this little block of code, especially here. Before, equals, and after, just there. Finally, you can use the Compareto method. So just one method instead of the lot. And if it's less than 0, when you use that method, it'll be earlier. If it's greater than 0, it'll be later. And if it equals 0, they're the same date. So I will make all of this code available to you, and I'd like you to just experiment with that. You can cut and paste that into your SAC. I'll put it in Student Common for you so you can get at it. All the best. Thank you.